Hey there, this is Paul Zimmerman of Paul Zimmerman Roses, and today we're talking to the good folks at Heirloom Roses. Episode of the Everyday Rose Show. I wanted to talk to the folks at Heirloom Roses because they're very tuned into their customers, and there's 5 basic things that I wanted to cover, and you can see a little more detail up here on the screen. One was COVID. You know, what's it been like having a nursery during COVID? It's really kind of changed the industry, and what's that really done? I also want to talk about their conservation program and their work with rose mosaic virus, and I'm just going to leave you with this little teaser. 4,500 varieties of roses, many rare, virus indexed. That is an amazing thing, and you're going to want to hear about that. We also talked about container roses, getting roses in container as opposed to bareroot. What are the advantages to that, the easiness and stuff, and some care tips to kind of get them started. We also talked about own root roses, getting them established, what to expect for year 1, year 2, and year 3. And then we just kind of like riffed a little bit on what's the future of the rose industry. So you know what? Let's go meet Ben and Stephanie.
Ben and Stephanie, it is so nice to see you guys and get a chance to talk about roses and talk about how you've been through the last year, because this is, June 2021, and obviously the last year with COVID has been a challenge, and we want to talk about the future of roses. We got a whole lot to do, but I think first thing to do, I would love for you guys to introduce yourself to my viewers. So Ben, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, my name is Ben Hanna, and my wife and I are the owners of Heirloom Roses. We're going on 10 years having owned the nursery now, and we bought that. We bought it from the original founders, Louise Clements and her husband John, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah, you've done some great stuff that I want to get into a little bit later. I've known you now for a while, so pretty much since you purchased the nursery, and you're doing some wonderful things and with own root roses. And also, I think we want to talk about your robust rose mosaic virus program, which is, that dirty secret that the industry doesn't want to talk about, but you take it head on and slam into it. And I love that. So we're going to jump into that a little bit later. So Stephanie, I'm going to chuck it to you. Introduce yourself to the folks.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Coker. I have been with Heirloom Roses going on 7 years now, and I am the director of marketing, but I think I also wear a lot of other hats. I'm also responsible for our sales and customer service teams. And so ultimately, my job is to help our customers be successful and own the relationship that we have with you.
And you do a great job with that. I mean, I see you on my Facebook group a lot. And I see you, both of you actually, all over the place, responding to customers and having that direct dialogue. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you two in particular, because we begin to talk more about where we think the industry is going, is you guys are actually dialed into the gardeners and the people who are buying the roses. And I think that's going to be fascinating. And Ben, like you said, Heirloom Roses, it's been around. I will give you a little personal background. When I got into roses in 1994, 95, I started looking for old garden roses. Hard to find back then. I heard of Heirloom Roses. Colonial White or Sombre Wee and Madame Itzhak Pereire were my first 2 old garden roses. And they came from Heirloom Roses. They came from John and Louise, as a matter of fact. So I've got over 2 decades experience with you guys. And Ben, your background in gardening is interesting, because you weren't in the gardening industry before you bought Heirloom Roses, but you talk about your grandparents having a rose garden. You mentioned a rose medallion, which you said was very scented. Give us a little bit of what that was like growing up that way. And was there a moment when you said, oh, now I'm kind of getting into gardening?
Well, I think I've always been into gardening. I've always had my hands in the dirt. I grew up on a farm in Oregon. We raised cattle, and my mom was an avid gardener, so I was always out in the yard helping her with that. And I continued that on throughout my life, and introduced my wife to the love of gardening and being in the yard when we were first married. And yeah, it's been good. I remember planting my first rose. My mom teaching me how to plant a bare root rose, and it was medallion, and it was right out in front of our house. And I drove by that old house the other day, and the rose wasn't there, but a lot of the stuff we had planted was still around. So it's a fun thing. Professionally, I've been in a lot of different roles, but gardening has always been kind of my go-to for a stress reliever to get away from it all. It's it's what I would enjoy. I wanted on the commute home. I thought, I'm just a short while away from being in shorts and an old T-shirt and getting my hands dirty at home. So I think I can relate to a lot of our customers in that. My wife and I had this dream, and we were talking about a career change. Life was crazy, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we could just do this all the time? Just what if we had a business where all we were doing was propagating plants and growing them? And that was, that was 15 years ago or so. And that over time, that came into fruition, and it's been a blessing.
Let me ask you a question, Ben. I mean, because I got into this as a hobby and a passion as well, and then I've obviously been in professionally. Now you kind of say the same route. Is your passion for gardening still there now that you're in the profession, quote unquote?
Well, I'll tell you, to be honest, it ebbs and flows. Last night I was actually in the garden hooking up drip lines, and it wasn't going well, and I was fixing PVC pipe, and I cut my hand. I had mud all over myself, and I was coming up with, this isn't any fun. So it's still a good place to be. I still love it, and it's still something we do. But when you're doing it all day, sometimes the hobby kind of falls to the side. But it's still a love and a passion of mine.
Yeah, the lines will blur. I know what you mean, but there are those moments, like you said, even if you're getting muddy and cutting your hand on PVC, you go, okay, this is why I'm here. This is why I do this, and it can be a rose that blooms or that you haven't seen in a while or something like that. So it's a passion, and it runs deep. I know how you feel on that one.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
it does. So Stephanie, now you have a very different background, sales and marketing. I checked your LinkedIn profile, easy for me to say. And you have a background in sales and marketing. Obviously, that's the reason why you are where you are here. Do you have a background in gardening, I mean, at all? Or did you just sort of take this job and go, now what am I learning about?
Yeah, it has been an interesting path, I tell you. I've spent the last 25 plus years of my career managing high-level customer service organizations and also sales and marketing. But I fell in love with heirloom roses. I, like many of our customers, had never grown roses. I had one poor little grafted rose that my mother had given me, and I think it grew out one side of the plant, but I could never get rid of it, And so when I started working with Ben and fell in love with own root roses, I quickly went from 1 to 5 to 10 to 50, and you know how it goes. They're like, they're like children. You can't have just one. So, I have kind of come up through the ranks and learned about roses from my tenure with Ben, and I can't imagine my life without him at this point.
I mean, that's a great way to do it, actually, particularly since you deal a lot with customer service, and is that you were in your customer's shoes, particularly your newer customer's shoes, 6 or 7 years ago. You were learning the ropes. So let me ask you this now. I always like to ask this question to people. Ben has already kind of given us his, because he has a background in roses. But was there a rose aha moment for you when, okay, you started with heirloom, you got some roses, and you started playing with? Was there a variety or a moment when you went, oh, now I'm starting to get it from here and not just from here?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it was Eden. Eden was my first climbing rose, and you can't help but fall in love with Eden. I mean, what more beautiful romantic bloom than on a climbing rose? So for me, it was definitely Eden. But then, I progressed and I started falling in love with some of the hybrid teas and some floribundas, and then all of a sudden, I fell in love with Cortus roses. And I think by the time I was done, I was at about 120 or so roses in my garden. So
yeah, I think Ben, I think we can agree. Stephanie's gone off the deep end, has come over to the dark side, I think. Well, guys, certainly, as you know, probably more than anybody else, this past year, like I said, this is June of 2021. COVID started in March of 2020 is when we kind of got on the radar screen. Stephanie, I've seen you on Facebook. We've emailed back and forth. So just from a nursery standpoint, and I think you're going to speak for all nurseries, particularly mail order nurseries during the past year, what have been some of the challenges and some of the rewards over the last season for you guys?
Sure. Yeah, I will speak to the challenges first. I think what we experienced when people were stuck at home and maybe started gardening for the first times ever were that they were somewhat inexperienced. They maybe had never ordered roses or any plants for that matter online before. And many of them had potentially never even placed an internet order whatsoever. So not only were we, educating people on how to grow their roses and how to take care of them, we were educating them through the ordering process, through what to expect when they receive them, how to care for them when they receive them, and just a whole rash of other, other topics. So I think the challenge was not just, hey, we're going to place an order and get it shipped to you, but really the whole gamut of what to expect and how to care for them, and what is a climbing rose versus a floribunda, and so there was a lot of education that happened during that time.
You were almost I mean, you were kind of starting at Roses 101 at that point. I mean, like you said,
Yes.
it's not only and actually statistics back you up, because there was a study done by the industry, the garden industry, and they think that during the time of COVID, for that 1 year period when it started in March of 2020, we added something like 20 million new gardeners. And you got to figure 90% of them were mail order, and the challenges that come with that. So, as you mentioned, wide open. But as you look back, do you say, you talk about new customers and getting people into gardening. I mean, that's got to be rewarding as someone who's a newish kind of gardener yourself.
Absolutely. And then that's where I was going to go with the rewards, is that, as challenging as that is, there's absolutely a trade-off there. I mean, how wonderful is it to help somebody and introduce them into the beauty of growing roses? And, ultimately, our goal is to help people be successful in their own gardens. We want them to be the heroes. And so, I think it gave us an opportunity to sit back and go, wow, this feels really good. This feels really good to be able to help people do this.
Yeah, and you guys do it in such a great way. You do a real, hands-on, but also just a real common sense, logical way that you guys approach rose growing. And Ben, I've seen the videos that you do, and you do some really terrific ones. And you explain it clearly, and that's just a wonderful thing, because as you know, we as educators can sometimes make this way too complicated, I think sometimes for people.
The videos we do are really driven from what our customers are asking us and how can we best support them and give them kind of just a hands-on visual that's simple to understand and answers their questions. So they've been, it's been a very productive tool for us to really.
Yeah, your videos are good. And for folks who want to see them, they're on your website, which is heirloomroses.com. And we'll put that up on the screen so folks can see it. So Ben, now I'm going to come to you for a little bit during this last year. So you're an owner, you've owned Heirloom Roses for 10 years. You're clicking along, you've got a great system, you've got a great staff in place. And was there a moment you just went, oh my gosh, what are we getting hit with?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to back up before March and say that we were watching this December or January of 2020. We were watching the news in China. We have just a few things that we buy out of China, and I was on the phone and emailing with a vendor, and was really surprised at how widespread the shutdown was, and so that led us to think that this is going to be a bigger thing. And so we've always had all of our customer service representatives work from home. All of our computer systems are in the cloud. All of our marketing team has always worked from home. And so we were actually really well positioned to just keep answering phones, keep taking care of customers, and just doing what we do. Certainly we saw that when the orders started to ramp up, we jumped in and really realigned our teams. So for me, just as a business owner, it was a leadership challenge with making sure our employees were all safe, and that our employees were able to do the work. And did we bring in seasonal labor or not? And then we brought people in later. So, really, it was in probably February that we really started seeing the increase, and we jumped in, and we actually retooled our entire shipping department within a week's period of time, and were able to double the number of orders out of there.
I mean, that's amazing to retool that. But that, again, that's your strong business background that comes into play, which I think is a big advantage. And also, I think, too, you guys, we're going to talk about own root production here in a little bit. And I really want to dive into that, because I know the three of us are strong proponents of that. But I mean, do you think being an own root nursery as opposed to being dependent, in other words, you're propagating in greenhouses, a little shorter time as opposed to a field grown bare root crop, which is 2 years to market? Do you think that maybe made you a little bit more nimble and able to respond a little better?
Yeah, at our nursery here, we don't just do one crop. Because we're growing everything ourselves, we take all of our own cuttings out of our fields or off of other plants. We have a lot of control over how and when we get our inventory. it's still a longer period of time. We can't just dial it up and get plants in 30 days, but we are certainly able to react more nimbly. So, we typically would grow 2 crops a year. We went to 4 crops a year to keep up. And, we turned on the heat in the greenhouses and it just kept growing roses through the winter and just kept on going. So, yeah, I think, the ability to grow own root roses in a container is what's made us be able to react and try to give our customer everything they're looking for.
You guys know rose growing has always got these moments when the industry just changes a little bit. I mean, I can go back to 1945, 46 when peace was introduced and the modern hybrid tea kind of came into fruition. To me, 2000, 2001 when William Radler's knockout rose was introduced changed the industry to a degree. And my gut feeling, and Ben, this is where I want you to weigh in as an owner, is that we've gone through the last year and all of a sudden mail order growing is ramping up. Do we think this is one of those moments in the rose industry where things are changing?
In general, online retail is taking off, and we have a whole new group of people that are buying online, and so that's happening in the gardening industry. And people that would normally go to a garden center now are relying on online retailers. And so, but the great thing though is that they can get such a vast selection online. You can get things that you couldn't find in a garden center. No garden center could possibly have the variety that we have of roses, and so people can really fall in love with what is really nuanced and neat and really meets their needs. So I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I really want to go back to the point that you talked about, Stephanie. I'm going to let you jump in here in a moment as well. Is that it's the diversification of selection that you guys have, and mail order nurseries in general, just because you can stock more inventory. As Ben, we talked earlier, you can be a little more responsive in terms of creating inventory. I mean, so Stephanie, are you seeing from a customer service and sales standpoint, are you seeing that kind of like broad diversification of roses that people are looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I am also seeing is that the purchase trend is following new home ownership. People are buying homes a little earlier in their lives now. And, you buy a new home, you've got some landscaping to do and you've got some decisions to make. And so I think more people are looking at their new home landscapes and going, what should I put in this bed? Should I put all hybrid teas, or maybe I want a shrub in this corner that's going to fill it out nicely? Or gosh, I've got one spot for a climber. Which climber should I choose? So I'm seeing a trend there. I'm also seeing a trend in, people are falling in love with new introductions quickly. Earth Angel a couple of years ago when it was introduced, it kind of steadily started to climb, and now it is a very hot seller. So I think people like those new introductions. They jump onto those. It might be something they don't have in their garden currently, and they want something new.
Yeah, I think a lot of too with the new introductions, I think people are getting, again, I went back to knockout earlier being a seminal moment, and to me, it's irrelevant whether you like knockout or not. That's irrelevant to the conversation as far as I'm concerned. It's the rose that taught American rose growers that you can grow a rose without a lot of fuss and a lot of chemicals. You own Heirloom Roses. It's a business. You're a passionate gardener, but you're kind of a keeper of the flame in the sense of all this diversification of genetics out there that a garden center simply can't carry because they don't have the space, basically. So, I mean, do you get excited about new roses and bringing these things to market?
Yeah, I think so. We have over 4,500 varieties of roses on our nursery, and a lot of those are old garden roses that haven't been in production. There may be things that have been taken off the market, but we're committed to keeping those healthy and keeping those genetics here. And we offer about 1,000 varieties online. So, that's a lot of roses to offer online, but we have even more here at the nursery. And so we just kind of go back through those. And I think what we're seeing customers do is they've grown a lot of roses. Now they're getting a little nuanced in it. And it's like, it's their hobby, but they're going to find something that's really unique and different and try that. And it's a lot of fun to see that. The new ones are great. Some of the new genetics are awesome. And they're certainly very disease resistant and stunning look, and they're just beautiful. But I'll tell you that a lot of the fun things I get excited about are when customers fall in love with the old garden roses and decided to start bringing those back in, and they learn the story behind them. And so, it's a great combination.
Yeah, I mean you're preaching to the choir. I mean, you and I have had conversations. My passionate affair with old garden roses, is always supersedes anything else with roses with me. In fact, I've added some new ones to my garden, not new ones, old ones to my garden. I call them old friends that I've been missing. And it's wonderful to have. Yeah, there's a charm and a romance they've got with the old garden roses. And Stephanie, are you seeing that? Obviously the new, the Cortez and the Earth Angel series and stuff. Are you still seeing the interest in the old garden roses from folks out there?
Yeah, this is actually one of the best parts of my job, is that I really get to see the full spectrum of our customer. And so we absolutely have people that are very passionate about growing old garden roses because their grandmother grew them, or, and they can remember the fragrance and they can remember the look, and they are looking for that to put in their own yard. We also see that, they may have had them in their bridal bouquet, and they're looking to, replicate that in their yard so that they can have it forever. But absolutely, we see a lot of people that are interested in the preservation of the history of those roses. They want to carry on the legacy, share them with their families. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. Yeah, we see that a lot.
Yeah, and you use the word passionate about old garden roses. I'd use the word nuts, quite honestly. you're very kind, Stephanie. It's old garden rose people having been around them for over 2 decades and loving every one of them. We're way over the top. I mean, the lengths that they'll go through to back when you could bring in roses from Europe. I mean, importing roses from Europe for like paying over $100 because they wanted that specific, bourbon rose or something like that. So. Yeah. But I think as rose lovers around the world, I think, we'll be good to know and glad to know that, Ben, when you talk about 1,000 in commerce, but 4,500 on the property, and just whether you make money or not, you're preserving the genetics. And that's a huge, huge, huge service to the industry. So I'm going to give you a big thank you for that.
You have a container grown rose that's not been field produced, that you're getting really a good clean plant. There's been issues over the years of field grown roses that are grafted and picking up viruses and other things through that production method that we ward off by growing them on their own roots here at the nursery.
Yeah, and you're leading into a question, Ben, that I know the industry sometimes doesn't like to talk about, and that's rose mosaic virus is basically what we're talking about. Okay,
yes.
And you know all about this. And rose mosaic virus, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's kind of a yellowing of the leaves. People think it looks like variegated foliage. It's not iron deficiency. The two are different from each other. Rose mosaic virus is a tissue-to-tissue contact virus. So you can take an infected plant onto a piece of clean understock that doesn't have virus. Now both the plant and the understock are virus, or clean plant and put it onto infected understock, and now both, again, the understock and the plant that you want itself are both virus with rose mosaic virus. That's how you get it. And with own root roses, and Ben, I want you to spend a little time, because I've always admired what you've done with rose mosaic virus and heirloom roses. You've taken it head on. You make no bones about it. Walk folks through. You get a new rose in the heirloom roses. Walk folks through your rose mosaic virus protocols.
So this has been something that John Clements, our founder, started, and we've held to religiously. We are just about not allowing this in our nursery. So we have a quarantine program. When we receive new roses, new introductions, and they're coming from hybridizers or other growers that we're bringing into our program, they go through an extensive process. We grow them out separate from all the other roses in a quarantine area. We send them off to laboratories and have all of the plants and genetics tested to make sure they're virus free. And then we are very careful about making sure that we don't deviate from that. We don't start producing a plant that is not virus free. And so then our production methods of taking cuttings and rooting those cuttings ensure that we're not going to produce a problem. So we start clean, and we just stay that way throughout the entire process.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about iron root roses is, like you said, you start clean, and you'll always be clean, because that rose is not it's an own root cutting that you're sticking. It's always the original plant itself that you're basically cloning, for lack of a better word. And I actually remember reading, or fairly recently, when I was doing a little bit of research for this, that in 1987, I believe, John Clements was actually standing in the nursery at David Austin Roses And he looked around and he said, "Oh my gosh, this is kind of the future of garden roses at the time," because David Austin was unknown in 1987. And he started Heirloom Roses, I think, 1988, if I have my date correctly. And he based a lot of it based on that. But he was passionate about bringing in material from Europe, which was great with the old garden roses. And where I'm going with this is it goes back to the 4,500 roses, which 3,500 which are not in commerce, and a lot of the old garden roses that John imported. So we know that you have a source of clean roses without rose mosaic virus moving forward, because a lot of the old garden roses got infected in the 1950s and 1960s.
Anything that was in field production at any time throughout the United States is subject. So we have actually, John was when he was working with David Austin in the very beginning, we have a lot of the test roses, and so we have the original roses that came into the United States. So Jude the Obscure, we have the original plants that came into the United States here at our nursery, and so we have a lot of those really unique things here that they're clean, they're here, you can't get better genetics than that, and so we're excited to always be producing those.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, you've got a genetic library like we were talking about earlier. You've also got a virus-free index library for, a VI program. It's what they call in the industry virus indexing program. And you've got kind of the two running parallel with each other, which is phenomenal. So again, hats off to you guys for that one as well, I think. And so we've got... I also think too, your owner at Roses and Containers, go back to what Stephanie talked about earlier, where she talked about, you're dealing with a lot of maybe first-time rose growers, first-time gardeners, first-time mail order people, et cetera, et cetera. To me, a container plant is just more friendly. And I buy a lot of bare roots. I love bare roots. I got no problem with bare roots. But if you're new, getting a rose in a pot with a root system, I think is just, Stephanie, I think you would agree from your customer service background that you've got and the people you talk to, that's just a more comfortable product, I think, for a new gardener to receive.
Absolutely. And I think, we're being trained a little bit by other mail order companies in that we expect instant gratification now. And so, a lot of people want to get something that they can put in the ground and they're going to have foliage and blooms in 3 to 4 weeks, so having a potted plant that you can do that with and be that much further ahead gives you a little bit more instant gratification.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's, I think, like you said, things like Amazon have spoiled everybody, and they think, you mentioned Eden earlier, you run out of Eden. People say, well, you must have a spigot that you can just turn on and Eden just comes pouring out. And it's like, doesn't quite work that way. Like Ben talked about going from 2 to 4 crops. So I want to talk about this now. So mail order now is container. Ben, you talked about this a little bit earlier about, container plants and stuff like that. So let's talk about this, because the industry in America certainly is going to container plants. That's where we're going right now, I think. And that's just not just from you guys. That's just even in garden centers and stuff like that. So Ben, give us your top 3, 4, benefits of container plants.
I think the container plants that you buy online are going to be a much healthier variety. You're going to get a plant that's actually has been actively growing and is all ready to be planted into the ground. You can buy a container plant can be bought just about any time of year. We ship 12 months out of the year. So in a lot of places, fall planting is the best thing to do. Or, it could be, we're shipping into California and fall even into winter planting is ideal. So it gives a new customer who is not familiar with a bare root plant and the narrow window to plant, it gives them a lot of flexibility to plant out their garden and to be doing something all year round. Container plants are also just a little more gentle. So they show up, you can leave them in that container for a little while. We always like people to get them into the ground soon, but they even in hot weather, you can plant and just keep them watered and they're going to do really well. They're just much more flexible and adaptable to anyone's garden.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think container plants, like you said, you can get them 12 months out of the year. I live in the upstate of South Carolina. I'm a true zone 7. We get a true dormant winter. I love planting in September and October. The rose gets a chance to get established. Another thing too with a container plant, a little tip for your customers and for people in general, with a container plant, if you have an area you think, okay, is that going to be enough sun? Is it maybe not going to be enough sun? You can actually just set the container there for a couple of weeks and just observe the plant. And it's going to tell you if that's a happy spot or not. So I think that's the nice thing. And so Now, receiving container plants, though, is a little bit different in terms of when they show up. And Stephanie, I know you've got some hard, fast things that you like to talk about. I've seen on the internet. When you get your container plant, A, what do you do with it? And Stephanie, I'm going to let you take this one because I know this is a passion of yours. The do's and don'ts of fertilizers you should and should not use on a container plant in the first year.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share this, because there's just
That's what I'm here for.
so much misconception out there about this. So, we really ask for just three things. We want you to plant it properly, feed it properly, and nurture it. I mean, roses are living, breathing things. They need your love. And so when it comes to receiving it and planting it, you absolutely need to use a potting soil or a soil in general that does not contain any granular fertilizer. Some of the brands out there that are self-feeding or have fertilizer, they will burn the roots on container plants. And, I hate to say it, but at a bare minimum, 9 out of 10 times, it will not survive. So it's very important that you plant it properly. The second one is feeding. We are strong proponents of liquid fish fertilizer. We have created our own brand of liquid fish fertilizer. We believe that it is the best for the plant in the first year. And we strongly suggest to our customer that when you fertilize every 4 to 6 weeks, you use only a liquid fish fertilizer. That prevents that opportunity for burn. It's best for the plant, and it's the safest way to do it. So, and then the final one is proper care. Like I said, you got to love these guys, love them, they'll love you back. And so, proper pruning, proper deadheading, and just, general maintenance. Roses need to be maintained. It's not something you can just put in the ground and walk away from. So, just get on a maintenance regimen with them and take care of them, and they're going to perform very well for you.
Yeah, they do. And I think, you talk about, the care, and people always have this conception of this is a no care rose. Well, there's no such thing as a no care rose. That'd be saying this is a no care pet. It's like, no, that doesn't exist. You have to do the basics with them, like you talked about it.
What's going on beneath the soil is so important. And so you're using a liquid fertilizer, and specifically a fish fertilizer, you're feeding the mycorrhiza down there. And that's just, it's all the things that rose really needs to establish. So like you said, it's that first year of getting established in root growth. And then the plant can really go up after that. I want to say the other thing that, the caring for a rose that happens is also the pinching back. Let your rose bloom and enjoy some blooms that first year, but don't be afraid to also start pinching that rose back. It's when you prune a rose and a small new plant, I call it pinching back, because it's not really pruning so much as you're teaching that rose to develop a good, healthy shape, and it's going to promote really good branching, and you'll have an overall nicer looking plant when you get done.
Yeah, you will. And for pinching back, for folks who might not be familiar with what Ben's talking about, he's not necessarily talking about like pruning, like you talked about. It's just, pinching the tips a little bit. And what that does is that stops that particular cane from getting very, very long and begins to form new growth from the base of the plant. So you get a fuller bush that way, which is, if you've, for those of you who've seen my videos before know, to me, that's the definition of a garden rose. Talk about own root roses, and just a real quick primer for folks in case you're not familiar. So an own root rose is where a company like Heirloom Roses, for example, will take a cutting of a rose and they'll put it in a rooting medium, and they'll root it generally in a greenhouse, misting house, or whatever, and then they'll pot that up, and that's what they send to you, the customer. What this means is that the root system of the rose is the same as the rose that you purchase. So for example, Stephanie talked about climbing Eden earlier. That means the root system is climbing Eden, and the rose itself above ground is also climbing Eden. That's an own root rose. Grafted, you take an understock. America, it's Dr. Yui, little semi-double red flower. You've all probably seen one. If you've ever budded rose, you're going to see Dr. Yui at some point. And what they would do is put the rootstock in the ground. They would take that little piece of climbing Eden, it's called a bud eye, and they would graft or bud, the words are interchangeable, onto the rootstock. So what does this mean for you, the customer? The rose above the ground is climbing Eden. The rose below the ground is the rootstock, generally Dr. Yui in the United States. That's the difference between own root and grafted roses. So I'm a big believer in own root roses. Anyone who's ever seen me talk about roses knows this. So Ben, You love own root roses as well. So you know what? For the defense of own root roses, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Hanna.
Yeah, so we love own root roses for a lot of reasons. I mean, we just think that overall you're getting a much better plant. So an own root rose, like Paul talked about, is the whatever's coming up from the base, the new base, the root growth that comes up from the base, it's the same plant. And so what you're going to get is a more full and developed plant over time. Now, it's going to start a little bit slower. You're not going to have that aggressive growth that comes from a rootstock, but what you're going to have is a more mature, developed plant over time. And so heirloom has kind of two meanings, right? It's old roses, but it's also that those roses are of really good quality and they'll be there for a long time. So what we see on grafted plants is eventually that rootstock wins out, and you're just continuously fighting Dr. Huey taking over your rose. And we know with an own root rose, they just get better over time. And for years and years and years, they just really look great. Another thing is, I really think you can go, you can change a whole zone colder on an own root rose because they're just a stronger plant. If you get a really, even if it's an anomaly, a freeze and a really hard cold time, and you lose some top growth, that plant's going to shoot right back from the roots, probably healthier than it was before. So it's just they're just really robust and strong, and really a good way to go.
I totally agree with that. And I want to just jump in for a second, Ben, because one of the things that I always talk about or teach about is taking an old cane out from the base every now and then on a plant. And that sort of rejuvenates the rose. I mean, that's the reason I use the word quite often rejuvenating instead of pruning, because that's kind of what you're doing. And with an own root rose, you can take an own cane out at the base, an old cane out at the base, and whatever comes from the base of that plant is going to be the rose that you purchased. And that's why it's easier, I think, from a care method to use the own root roses as well.
So, and part of that pruning a mature plant is really, it's thinking about the structure and getting it all right and knowing that it's going to be a broader, larger, wider plant, because it's going to send up canes, maybe 12 inches away from the plant, and it's all the same. So really just a better, mature looking plant.
I mean, Stephanie, you've now grown a lot of own root roses over the last 8 or 9 years. Give us your 2 or 3, man, I'm an own root proponent, and boom, this is why.
Yeah, for me, it's about hardiness. I guess the best way to answer this question is with a customer story. And this one is very touching to me. We had people in Paradise, California that lost everything several years back with the fires. And we had some of our customers in that area call us devastated because not only did they lose their homes, they also lost their gardens. And so, people are very resilient. They build their homes back, and lo and behold, a year or two later, they're calling to tell us that their roses are back. The fires went over the top, maybe burned off their foliage, but that own root rose underneath that soil was strong and healthy and came back for them. And so I think that that's just a very touching story and a tribute to, what you can expect from a very hardy own root rose. So. Yeah,
Stephanie, I think you just made the best case for own root roses I've ever heard in 25 years in this industry. I'll tell you that right now. I'm gonna bottle that one and remember it and make sure I give you credit for that, and I can also. So we've got own root roses. I know we all agree that they're great. So Stephanie, you deal a lot with the customers, and you talked earlier about. You had a whole lot of new folks to roses, and you had to, I don't want to say you had to walk them through it, but you had to work them through. So, Stephanie, I want you to talk us through. So, I'm a new rose grower. I've never grown a rose in my life. Maybe I've seen bareroot roses in somewhere or something along those lines. I order from Heirloom Roses. I get my 1-gallon rose, nice plant that you guys deliver as always. It's an own root rose. And so walk us through, you've walked a little bit through the fertilizer, and you're welcome to talk about that, but give us expectations. What should I expect year 1, year 2, year 3? And what are Stephanie's care tips to make sure that rose is going to be successful for me?
Yeah, I would love to speak to this. So I think, the right expectation is that in the first year, your rose is going to get a couple of feet of growth, and you're going to get a couple of blooms that first season. You're going to get to see what it's going to look like for you. Your first blooms may look a little small. That's very normal. We suggest you cut those off and wait for a couple more bloom cycles until they show you fully what they're going to look like in size, shape, and true color. And then, the second year, after they've come out of their dormancy, they're going to take off. You're going to get several more feet of growth. Your plant is going to get much fuller, and you're going to get many more blooms that second year. Again, you prune them, put them to sleep in the winter, and when they wake up that third spring, this is what we say: they leap, they go bonkers. You're going to get a fully mature plant by year 3. It's going to be full of blooms. It's going to reach the mature height and width, and you're just going to have the most beautiful plant you've ever seen in your life. So that's kind of what you can expect in the first 1, 2, and 3 years.
Yeah, we always talk about sleep, creep, leap,
Yep.
are the expressions that we use for year 1, sleep, year 2, creep, year 3, leap. And the other thing I want to add with own root roses, and again, folks who've seen my videos and stuff or programs have heard me talk about this before, is that budded roses began a lot of times because you had to take a rose that maybe couldn't handle being on its own roots. In other words, the DNA of the plant wasn't vigorous enough to grow on its own roots. So you budded it on an artificial rootstock to push it. So to me, we're going back to garden roses here, okay? Which is a rose that we've talked about, that can handle itself on its own, that deals well, plays nice with other plants and perennials and shrubs and stuff along those. So to me, and Ben, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. The actual DNA of a rose that can be struck onto its own roots, that's number one, because not all own roses can be propagated on its own roots. And number two, Stephanie, you talked about this, a rose that can do that, sleep, creep, leap. To me, the DNA is better. So Ben, I'd like to just get your thoughts a little bit on that as well. How do you feel about, own root roses just because of the DNA, the genetics?
Yeah. Well, let me push back a little bit on that some shouldn't be propagated on root, but they can be, because in the hybridizing process, they're all grown as seedlings, and they've started as a seedling. And then most hybridizers then will grow them on their own root until they go to a production process. They will all grow on their own roots, but some of them certainly won't grow as vigorous. And we've seen a few of those at the nursery here, and we take them out of production. Sterling silver is one. That thing's a bear to grow. And we don't grow it anymore. We offered it for a while. A lot of rosarians, who are very careful with their roses will grow that. But there's a few, but for the most part, everything that we offer, we think grows very strongly on their own roots, and probably does better on their own root.
I mean, that's great that you do a testing program, and I actually appreciate you correcting me. You are correct. Just because it can be grown on root doesn't mean it should. And I'm going to share a little story with you guys. So this was back in ways and ways. I was part of the World Federation of Rose Society's Heritage Preservation Committee, and we're sitting in a room with a bunch of us. It's like 20 people, and it was a conference, and Peter Beals was in the room with us, and he was kind of like giving some guidance and stuff along those lines. And people were saying, "Oh, we got to preserve this rose because it's the only one around. We got to preserve this rose and this rose." And Peter Beals at one point in this very Peter Beals style went, "Well, why should we preserve a rose that really isn't very good? We shouldn't preserve a rose just for the sake of preserving. If it's a bad rose, we should just let it die out." And I think that kind of alludes back to a little bit of what you're talking about as well. So yeah, I agree. I mean, it's I think they just make better plants. I'd like to wrap this up, and this has been some great information, guys. And so I'm going to start with you, Stephanie. I'm going to go with you, Ben. I'm going to let you make the last case for this thing. So, we've come through this last year with roses, and roses have got us through a lot of this last year. I think that's safe to say, Stephanie, just like the story you talked about with the Paradise fire. And so now that we're sort of on the other end of what's been going on over the last year, Stephanie, where do you see roses growing and going to and continuing to speak to people?
Yeah, I don't think they're going away. That's for sure. I think people will continue to fall in love with them. We all appreciate how rewarding they are. There's so many applications for roses, whether you're beautifying your own landscape, you're buying a rose as a tribute or a memorial to someone, or just a barrage of other reasons. We all have very personal reasons that they're meaningful to us, and it's it's a part of who we are. And so I don't think that that's going to change. I think people will continue to embrace, they'll continue to grow, and I hope that they continue to pass the legacy down to some of the younger people of our generations as well.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to let you get the last word in. As you remember that moment with your grandparents' garden, planting that medallion. Now you're owning own root roses, owning heirloom roses, and caretaker of 4,500 roses, and doing the main thing like that. And you say your passion is still here. So Ben, just give us your passion for roses and how you see it going into the future. Where are we going now?
After the craziness we've had this year, I think that roses are more important than ever, partially in that they help our mental health. All right, we all need something beautiful, and we need something to look forward to, and we need something that is just, you can just see the beauty of creation coming alive right in front of you. And so I'm a big proponent of, we grow healthy vegetables and things in our garden, and roses are there for our mental health. And everyone should take part of that. And if you're scared about it, or if it's new, or you're thinking, oh, I only hear that roses are really finicky. They're not. They're easy to grow, and you're going to make a few mistakes, but they're also they're very forgiving. And so I just see people kind of getting started, and it just grows on you. And literally, you're going to want more and more roses, and you're just going to have a lot of fun with it. So I would encourage people to just get started, fall in love with something, and give it a try. I think, as people start growing more and more and spending more time in their yards and outdoors, it's something that you can embrace as a lifestyle. It's something that's a perfect gift to give. It's easy to give a rose gift. An online rose, we just send it right to the people who are receiving it. And then look for something different. Look for something that's just, that's just going to be very different, and that you're going to love and want to share with your friends.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Paul, to something Ben
Please
just
do.
said, whether you've been growing roses for years and years, or you're just getting started, we want to help everybody. So my customer service team is required to grow roses in their own homes. It's a requirement of the job, because we want them to be able to understand the needs and the desires of our customer, and be able to help them along the way. So if you're just getting started, don't be afraid. We've got your back. We're here to help you. We'll educate you and make sure that you too can grow beautiful roses.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you guys wrap it up, and Ben, you mentioned the word fun, which is a big thing that I talk about. And Stephanie, your customer service team, growing roses, and Ben, the way you guys do it. At the end of the day, it's supposed to be fun. And folks at Heirloom Roses, like yourself, Stephanie, and your team, and Ben, your team, are there to make the fun in roses. And if it's not fun, that's what gardening needs to be. Ben, you talked about gardening being a stress reliever before you bought Heirloom Roses, and it still is. I'm the same way. Stephanie, you're the same way. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a lot of fun. And speaking of fun, I've had a wonderful time talking. I can't thank you, Stephanie. I can't thank you enough. Ben, thank you so much for joining me on this program.
Thank you, Paul. It was a lot of fun, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Until we meet again, happy rosing.